that is worthy of speaking about. So, topic is supposed to be challenging challenges faced by hospitals during the pandemic. I will give the discuss. I mean, maybe I introduce both the doctors because I know them better. Because is uh, Roy is there. He works with SRMC. He's one of the top radiologists, not only in the city but in the country. And he's also has a startup with us at HDIC. Just did a great deal. His startup is doing extremely well. And of course, Sandeep runs the hospitals. He's a general surgeon. Both guys are extremely well known in the medical field, and also both are extremely interested in innovation and working with startups and young people. So it's great for us to have the two of them come and spend an hour with us. And with that introduction, I will pass it to one of our managers, Arjuna. She will sort of lead the conversation. This will give her experience as well to lead conversations and so on. So I'm going to hand over to her and just help her in case she needs any help. So Arjuna, over to you to take the conversation forward this evening.
Thank you, sir. I welcome everybody for the today's digital cafe. I welcome all the doctors for the today's digital cafe. So before we start, I would request all the participants to be on mute and kindly unmute yourself while you speak. Since this is a platform for a free flow talk and discussion, anybody can raise questions and provide answers or suggestions. Hence, by doing this, we'll keep this a free flow session. Before we move into the session, we have made a poll for today. So we'll be posting the poll link in the chat box. So participants, please click on the link and then follow the poll questions. Please respond to the questions. So the first question, which one do you think is the most popular and effective revenue models for startups? Subscription, pay-per-use, licensing, freemium, advertising. So please give me your answers. Yeah, we are getting responses. Yes, we are getting. So moving on to the next question. What's your preferred method for learning new information? Is it traditional classroom, one-on-one training, virtual classroom, webinars, or self-directed with lots of reading? Are we getting responses?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Archana. Where do I get these responses?
Sir, the response we'll be getting, you'll be just.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The chat box. I mean, I know, but where do I get the chat box? Oh, it's there, right? Okay, this one. Okay, fine. Yeah, got it.
Okay, sir. Okay. We'll move on to the next question. What do you think is one of the reasons for startups to fail? Run out of cash, no business model, poor marketing, market demand, lack of mentoring. Yeah, we are getting responses. So we move on to the next question. What do you think is an important several strategy to be followed by businesses during the pandemic? Planning in advance, keep track of expenses, reassessing the business model, securing investments. Yeah, we are getting the responses. Yes. So yeah. So done with the poll questions. So we'll now move on to the session. We'll have the poll results at the end of the session. We'll just have a short introductory talk from the doctors, and then we'll move on to the discussion. So we'll start with Dr. Roy. Yes, Roy, you can go ahead. Dr. Roy.
Roy, you have to
Dr.
unmute.
Roy? Doctor, you're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, doctor, we can, yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Now this pandemic management by hospitals depends on the size of the hospital. Now, how big the hospital is and how many staff they have and things like that. So let's divide it into a large hospital, say, which has about 50 beds or so, or the hospitals which have less than 50 beds, which is running with few staff members. Now, the larger hospitals handle this pandemic much better than the smaller ones. One of the main reason is infrastructure. Just imagine, a small hospital, a 50-bedded hospital. Now, for you to go to the second floor, there will be only one lift available. And when infected patients come in, that would be a major issue. And a lot of common areas, you can't segregate the infected ones from the non-infected ones. So that's another area of difficulty. And the most difficult thing that a small hospital would face is staff. It's not the doctors, but the nurses. Can you all hear me? Hello?
I can hear you, yeah. Please go ahead, yeah.
You can hear me, right? Yeah. Okay. Now it is the support staff like nurses and technologists. Now, with wearing PPE and all that, nurses can work only for 6 hours. And so to man a ward, you need more nurses. Usually the nurse timing will be 8 hours. So you need more nurses. And after they work for a week, they will have to go on a quarantine. So we'll need extra nurses for that. So these are the reasons why a small hospital of say 50 beds or so is not able to sustain or cater to COVID patients. So that is the major hazard. And because of this COVID situation, now other patients have stopped coming to hospitals fearing infection. So these are the problems that a small hospital faces. But larger hospitals, they tackle this better because they have nursing colleges. They have larger number of nurses. They're able to quarantine them more effectively and so on and so forth.
Thank you, doctor. Yeah.
Taking on from what
Sandeep,
Roy said, I think broadly I can classify them into 3 issues. One is financial, okay. 2 is staff, and third one is probably safety, health, segregation, safety, and decontamination, and those kind of issues. Now, I think the biggest challenge is financial, which I think is not unique to hospitals. It's by all businesses, wherein basically your income is down. In other businesses, they are completely shut possibly. But in hospitals, it's a little different. Our business is down because the elective surgeries and the routines are becoming significantly less in number. But at the same time, because we are running, we have to work, unlike other institutions which can. I think that cost of having to pay the staff is something, it's an expense which continues. I don't know how other businesses are handling it. I know some of them are saying we won't pay the salaries for a few months. But we are not able to do that because we have to continue to pay the staff because in principle we are working. So that is one challenge. At the same time, when you look at the cost structure for a hospital in terms of its capex, there is a rental of a 4-story, 5-story building. There is a cost on the EMIs on expensive equipment that you have invested on, CTs, MRIs, which go into double-digit crores. And of course, the staffing and the doctors' salaries are significantly large as well. So all this is a recurring expense which has to continue because in principle, you're still working. Yeah, you can't shut down your essential service and therefore you're working, but your revenue is down to something like 20-30% of what it was. So this revenue challenge is something that's faced by all businesses, but probably a little unique because your capex are higher, your outflows are higher, and you're running and you're not shutting down, and therefore the necessity to pay. The second issue is the staff. As Sir said, getting staff, especially nurses, to work has become a significant challenge. Because I think though a lot of them go beyond what is necessary and put their life on the line, if you want to call it that, there is a significant population who believes that I think across healthcare workers, like with anybody else, the human tendency tends to kick in. I have elderly people at home. My husband is not sending me to work. I have people, there is a fear that I'll get corona back into the house. And what if my elderly parents or mother-in-law or father-in-law gets infected? So even if the person is willing to work, there is a lot of reluctance from their family to send them to work. Even though I can understand that and empathize with it, I have a hospital to run. And therefore, how do I balance that with the fact that I just have to get them to work because I have a service to run? That's one thing. Second, also, I think the lack of public transport. I think we forget how many of our staff are in public transport, and the lockdown and the lack of buses and trains and everything. I think we had to do pickups and drops over the last 3 months. I think my personal car or the ambulance would have done 250, 300 kilometers a day, going around picking up important staff from places, Padapani, even Avadi, because they couldn't come by themselves. So staffing was a big issue, both out of fear, both out of inability to travel, and trying to handle, as Sir said, the patients with the limited staff when you have to give them off after work is an issue. Third issue was what COVID did in terms of health, safety, security, the need for segregation. And the disease itself was unique in the sense that, there was this basis of screening everybody before we come into the hospital. I think because if we didn't screen them, you had the risk of exposing the staff and all other patients in the hospital to a COVID positive patient, a corona positive patient. But initially there were issues about whether we could screen everybody who's asymptomatic. And then the emergencies keep coming in, particularly if you're into deliveries. Like our hospital delivers about 120, 130 a month, which is 4 or 5 a day. What happens if a person comes into labor and you don't know whether they are positive or negative? Okay. And we found at least 15% of them asymptomatic and positive. So would I be how would I segregate them from the rest of the people was a challenge. So we had to devise methods by which the potential people at risk, symptom-wise or without symptoms, who come in for any problem into the hospital, had to be segregated against those getting admitted who are not at risk or who were screened and found to be negative for corona. This brought into another dimension as to the test for screening itself is not 100% accurate. So that meant that we wear protective equipment for everybody assuming they are positive. That tended to push up costs, and wearing PPE all the time is not a very comfortable process. And of course, this balancing of costs and service, some people did it well, some people did it poorly, some people became avaricious. So I think there are balances to all of it, because it's, after all, at the bottom line, I think a lot of people thought it was, there are lots of things I think we can, that's where the perception and controversies happen. And that's an interesting phase of how the costings happened, and why is the cost of taking care of a corona patient so expensive? Are you right in charging so much? So many other controversies cropped up. But basically, I feel that the three major problems we faced are health and safety, lack of staff, and sometimes you had to pay the staff extra when your earnings are less, and the complete breakdown of the regular patients and therefore the regular income. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for sharing the overview on this. So we'll move on to some these questions in deeper. So what do you see the most practical challenges in hospitals during this current scenario, and how these hospitals are managing these challenges? So we'll have the response from you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. For us, we run a hospital about 50 beds. Of course, I work in Ramachandra, but I practice in a chest hospital. started by my dad. Now, that is a smaller hospital. Now, the major challenge, as I told you, was staff. See, this being a chest hospital, immediately there are a lot of patients who flowed in, who had negative tests, the PCR test, but they walked in when you did a CT scan, they were all positive. So the staff were not very cooperative to, put up with that. They had to be, people were very alarmed. So we had to actually shut our hospital for about 15 days during this intense lockdown. So that was a major challenge for us to, because being a chest hospital, a lot of patients with corona walked in. But now it has been, the issue has come down with the drop in number of cases. And as Sandeep said, another problem was, significant drop in regular patients who came in. So the income fell significantly. So uh, that's something we just cannot do with. And we are not, now the government says you can't shut the hospital without a reason. So we had a reason during the intense lockdown because few of our staff tested positive. So they themselves closed this for some time. But that is a problem. Now, for us, staffing is a major problem. I don't know what Sandeep feels about it. Staffing is a major problem.
Absolutely, sir. I agree. Staffing is the biggest difficulty. We find that, finally nobody is there to put their life on the line. It's all right to say altruistic, passion, etc. But, it's very sobering to realize that a lot of people, and I wouldn't blame only the nurses or the technicians. I think a lot of doctors also, wouldn't come in unless absolutely necessary, which is fair enough. But you have a hospital to run, and it becomes very difficult when you can't run it without nurses, etc. And it's a challenge in terms of we also did realize that a lot of our interactions now has moved on through. So we were getting a lot of telephone calls, so I don't want to come, I'm worried about corona, I don't want to come to a hospital particularly, and therefore can I call and speak over the phone? Okay. So one thing that happened was, telemedicine in some way. It was phone medicine to begin with. And then I think telemedicine, at least in our institution, now we do a lot of calls on video, and at least most of the advices can be given on video. And the advice, that it can be, because initially it was all phone calls and there was no way to monetize it, to put it. And then telemedicine, I think, is a thing which has changed in these corona times. But it also comes with its usual challenges as to what are we going to miss? Are the medical legal aspects to it? How do I push a prescription and make sure that it's all proper? And more importantly, how do I handle a reasonable group of people in India who are not able to have access to a computer, or elderly who are not familiar with smartphones, who say, I just want to handle you on a phone call, right? I think those are issues, I think, so telemedicine was one. I think overall staffing, finance was the big thing. To us, in a small space, like Sir said, segregating the potentially positive people from the negative people, identifying who could be the people who are infected when they keep coming in for, say, a delivery, were the challenges. Like, I'll give you an example. We had a person, so we were screening them for delivery. Somebody's been with us for 10 months on regular thing. We said we will admit you and induce you for labor or deliver you or cesarean section or whatever it may be in 2 days' time. So we do a corona test 2 days before and they're positive, right? Now, what do we do with this patient? Initially, the government would allow patients to be delivered only at corona centers, which means, and we had a very reluctant staff who did not want a COVID positive person coming into the hospital. We also had issues of how do we protect other people and our staff. So where do you deliver this person? Is it right to send them away to another facility when you've taken care of them, for 10 months, and 2 days before their big event, you're saying, go to a strange place, new doctor, and get this done. So I think there were also these kind of moral and ethical issues. Finally, we had to motivate our staff. And what happened basically is that the 2 or 3 patients who came in as an emergency and delivered became positive, and our staff took care of them and realized that they were safe. And then because this happened 4 or 5 times, they realized as long as you wear adequate protective wear, is no big deal taking care of a asymptomatic or a mildly symptomatic COVID positive patient. And then over a period of 2 months, we graduated into actually delivering COVID positive people, even though they had a positive, we knew they had a positive report. So it's been a very nice evolution of both our fears, our anxieties, and our practice in terms of how we do it, as well as big learning.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Doctor. We have a question from Krishnan Rama. So Krishnan, can you please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question?
Yeah, good evening. This is actually, I would like to ask the doctor that why different hospitals have different charges for the pandemic COVID-19, especially for testing and treatment, because I have come across several cases, known cases, where they were charged 16 lakhs or 10 lakhs and things like that, and then still the patient died also. So I'm not sure, and also the insurance company is not covering the entire treatment, because whatever is the insurance is offering and the cost which a hospital is charging, there is a vast gap or difference. This is totally disappointing in some of the cases, like the patients are taken for a ransom in this particular pandemic. I don't know, especially with the private hospitals. So,
Sandeep, can I come in?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, sure.
The patients are overcharged.
Yeah, I'll tell you why the patients are overcharged. Now, we told you about the staffing and things like that. So we are expected to pay more for nursing staff and things, things like that. But it looks like you're talking about a larger hospital, say more than 50 beds, a bigger hospital. The main cost is because of not for the treatment of that patient, but the cost is for protecting the rest of the people in the hospital and also the patients to come. Now, just imagine a COVID ward. Now, there is a patient who is using the linen. Now, can we wash that linen and use it again? In most of the COVID hospitals, at least I came out of COVID. So I was admitted in a hospital. And I was told, including the blanket, was sent for incineration. Right? That is one issue. Then the PPE, the cost of PPE is not very cheap. And as I told you, because of the 6-hour period that nurses can work, we'll have to, protect them with more PPE. And and also the insurance for the staff. Now, many staff, hospital staff, they want insurance to be purchased on the name for them to be working in a COVID center. Now, that is another expenditure for the hospital. All these, push up the charges for treating a COVID patient. And other things like imaging. Now, if they have to go for CT scan, now definitely that CT scan room cannot be used for another, say, 1 hour or so for cleaning and, for sterilizing. It takes quite a lot of time. It's a process. So the number of patients, the other patients cannot come in. So it has to, the CT scan charge cannot be the usual CT scan charges that the hospital charges. There has to be a premium on that. Now all this push up the charges.
So the only thing, testing, I think the test charges are pretty much fixed. I think it was initially 4,000, then it became 3,500. Now it's around 3,000 for the test of the COVID itself. Now there is a lot of controversy over the test itself, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the test is false negative in 25% of people, meaning 1 in 4 the test would be negative while you could be positive, right? So that's an intrinsic problem with the test. And there is this thing that, I was negative. They admitted me and told me it's corona. If you had symptoms, you're possibly corona. You might be false negative, and that's the reason why you end up doing a CT scan, which comes at a cost. Like sir said, the CT scan and the decontamination costs and all of that. So sometimes, if you're positive, you needed additional tests. So a large majority were mildly symptomatic, but if you had it to go into the ICU, then the cost escalated. Okay, because of oxygen, ventilatory support, and things. And there were not many antivirals initially, and some of the antivirals or the medications I know there are not many medications that are of proven benefit, but when somebody gets very, very ill, like in the ICU, we have to try a lot of these newer medications, which come at around 50,000. Have to give it at twice or three times a day. Then this cost kind of goes up. And of course, as sir said, like for instance, the PPE is, even if you say it's 1,000 rupees a PPE, that's the MRP. You have 2 nurses in a ward, 6 hours, that's 4 shifts, okay? 2004, that's 8,000, that's nurse alone. Then you have doctors coming in for rounds, say 2 times a day. That's another 2,000, 10,000. Then there are staff working there, the servants who come and pick up stuff. Then, because the entire hospital is a COVID unit, everybody from the watchman to the reception to whatever are wearing COVID. So you're looking at, on the PPE itself, a 15 to 20,000 rupees cost per day, if you divide all these people into 4 shifts. Okay. So therefore, 20,000 is the cost on PPE alone per day. And if you stood there, if you calculate it across 10 days, this is 1,000 rupees per person. If you calculate across 10 days, it comes to 2 lakhs. It seems ridiculous to spend on protective wear for 2 lakhs, but this is the math I told you. Okay. Now, if you had 10, 15 patients, the 2 lakhs gets divided across those 10 patients. Okay. But if you had 2, 3 patients in the ward, that means that 2 lakhs gets divided across 2 or 3 patients. And therefore, the PPE cost itself comes to 50,000. I think initially the costs were that. I would agree that there was a bit of avariciousness. I can't deny that there was not avariciousness in some hospitals. But by and large, you must realize the costs are exceedingly higher because of these reasons. And I think if there was an excess charge put, it was probably because, as he said, the nurses and the doctors, everybody is like a hazard pay. You had to pay them extra to come to work. That pushed up the cost. And at some point, to keep that entire hospital running in the absence of any other revenue, it entailed a higher cost. Unfortunately, some of that should have been transferred to the patient. As I said, unfortunately, was transferred to the patient, which ended up increasing the cost. So I think these are the broad reasons. Not all of them are justifiable, but if you did calculate it specifically, it came up to at least 20 to 25,000, whichever way you spin it, per day for a mildly symptomatic patient who didn't go into an ICU, 15 to 20,000 a day. So if you had to be quarantined for 10 days, 20,000 a day automatically turns to 2 to 3 lakhs. And that was the ballpark figure. And I think towards the end of the epidemic, between people, 2 to 3 lakhs still is an extremely high figure. And I personally feel that's the reason why mildly symptomatic people should be quarantined at home and should not come to hospital just to pay 2 lakhs. But that's a treatment thing. You won't get there.
Now, let me just interrupt you, doctor. Now, why this entire charges cannot be covered under insurance scheme? Because all these insurance companies are not able to support, like they have fixed treatment charges, for example, for a heart surgery or for a knee replacement or for a delivery or things like that. They have, but this particular Corona-19, they don't have any fixed charges or even the charges what is supported by insurance and the billing part. There is a vast difference. So I feel the insurance companies should be able to cover up, because most of the patients, more than 50% of the patients will be salaried people who have purchased these insurance policies and depending on that.
100%, I agree completely that the insurance should take up. I can't speak for the insurance, but you must realize that even during a regular surgery, if you look at, there were certain consumables which the insurance will not touch, underpads, disposables, certain other things that were used, right? Uh, Bed covers, for instance, disposable covers. Many of the disposables your insurance won't cover. Okay?
Yep.
You had to pay for it in extra, or if you went for the cashless, the hospital absorbed it in some manner. Like Dr. Roy said, these protective wear, which and the disposable linen, and or the fact that you had to dispose normal linen, and the fact that you had to get so much on PPE was never covered by the insurance to begin with. Okay. And therefore, I think the insurance decide if you don't cover the PPE and other stuff, and the way the PPE had to be billed, there was no agreement in terms of, how. So I think those were the stumbling blocks, as well as the new medications and everything were a lot more costly. So I think the insurance also didn't expect this amount of people getting admitted, and therefore so much of a payout.
I
Yeah,
think
correct.
let's take up the other question on the thing, because I don't think we should pick on them on this.
Thank
It's,
you. Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
let's
Yes.
take the another question which is
Yes.
on the chat box. Go ahead, Arichana.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we have a question from C3 MedTech Yash. He's asking when do we expect things to get better from the hospital point of view?
From the pandemic on the whole, or
You're on mute.
Yeah. No, Roy, your guess could be better than.
no. You're talking about the pandemic as a whole, or what is the question like?
The question is when we are expecting things to get better from the hospital point of view. The whole pandemic.
The pandemic problem. I mean, to be very honest with you, one cannot really predict, and I think the prediction is that it will go beyond. Beyond this year for sure, and that is for sure. We can see that it's going to stretch beyond the new year.
Yes, doctor.
I also think at the end, probably you'll have to get used to wearing masks and the normal norm, the new normal, as they say. And they're talking about a second epidemic happening in UK and in other places. So, honest answer is we don't know.
Yes, doctor. Thank you. So the next question I will ask. What do you anticipate to be the hospital situation in the next, the coming 1 or 2 months? Will the hospital care be regularized in the 1 or 2 months from now?
Yeah, go ahead, Sandeep. I'll come later.
So I don't think it will be regularized, because I think there will always be COVID in the community. There is community spread and there is COVID in the community. There are asymptomatic patients who are positive and they do come into the hospital. I hope there is more clarity on whether these asymptomatic people spread and all of that. So I think we will be left with a new norm where we have to consider everybody as positive and take precautions accordingly. Every person we meet on the road or in the hospital or when you buy things in your grocery store, everybody is positive until proven otherwise, and protect yourself. To the hospital, it becomes a unique challenge, as to we know that sometimes doing procedures on positive people puts them at higher risk and puts us and all the health workers and other patients also at higher risk. And so how is this segregation going to go on? Basically, if you believe, this herd immunity theory has been spouted many times, and 60% must get it of the population get it before we have a herd immunity. And whether even that, if 60% get it and 3% of them die, how large people must be die before we have a herd immunity? So I really think that we just have to get used to the new norm and accept it and live with the change.
Things will definitely change. I'm sorry, things will definitely change if they come out with a vaccine, with an effective vaccine. So,
Very true, because the only way to build herd immunity without killing people is if you have a vaccine. Or the hope that the virus will mutate and become less virulent. That's a hope that all of us have. One of these two must happen.
Yes, doctors. Thank you. So we have a question from Atishi Agarwal. Can you please unmute and can you go forward with your question?
Yes, definitely. Hello, doctor. Thank you for your such insightful points. I have just one quick question. That do you think that in the current hospital settings, there might be an opportunity to optimize methods of sanitizations and introduce targeted methods to reduce workload efforts for cleaning staff? Or is it more of a compliance that you have to go through 100% cleaning of areas, even if they have not been touched by any human or any infected patient?
You want the question repeated? Or?
No, I'm
Yeah.
reading the question. I'm reading the question. So I think it's there on the text. So I assume the question is regarding disinfection methods to reduce
Yes.
load and effort of cleaning staff on disinfection.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been looking at the innovations that are happening there. I think the only thing that has really innovated is possibly the UV light, which I think few companies have released UV lights which can be left in the room for a particular period of time, which sterilize it. But how are going to how effective they are? As my pet peeve with a lot of technology is the fast tracking of these with no proof. Okay, for instance, these temperature guns that you see, that infrared temperature guns that you see, everybody shooting on your forehead when they go into a mall or even into a hospital. It is ridiculous. Has anybody seen the value of the gun on the other side? After they shot you, it will be 90 degrees, 91 degrees, 92 degrees, 94, to such an extent that I've forgotten what the normal body temperature is as a doctor. Okay, I haven't seen a single accurate reading, and it is, it is just for the show that something is being done before I let you in. Okay, it doesn't make an iota of difference because the readings are hopeless. And I get readings of 91 and 92, and the patient should be dead by that time of hypothermia. Okay, so like this, I am very worried when technology is pushed in, saying it is wonderful when there is no standardization. And honestly, there is no trials comparing it with real thermometers and how those infrared thermometers work. I really don't. So I'm always a little skeptical about things that were pushed in with very less background studies in terms of, this is a virus that we have known for 3 months. How do I know this ultraviolet rays kills it? How effective is it in killing? At what distance? I don't know. And would I bet the life of me, my healthcare workers and patients on it? Would I allow my CT scan room to be just illuminated with ultraviolet rays for 1 hour and hope that it's decontaminated? I think that's the question that Dr. Roy is better at answering. And what happens to high touch surfaces like switches, etc.? Are we going to keep the UV light near it? Is it much easier and simpler to wipe it down? Should there be other way of spraying and contamination with traditional methods like hypochlorite or whatever, which has been known to work? I don't know whether we have solutions to that. But thankfully, the new thing that formites or may not be the most important way of spread as opposed to droplets. So touch-based spread may not be that important, is the thing that's going to save us. But I don't know the answer to this contamination. But I'm very skeptical of how they work because I don't know whether they've been tested accurately.
Sure, I get it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Roy, I will ask you the question. Would you be happy illuminating your CT scan room after you have done a CT on a corona patient?
I'm just going to buy a few UV sterilizers tomorrow. Okay. Now, strictly speaking, it has not been proved. Okay. But what else can I do now? See, between patients. Now I have a line of say 7-8 patients lined up for the morning CT scan. Right now, one patient in between, I see COVID changes.
Correct.
Now, look, for the last few days, I've been sending back the 6 of them, asking them to come the next day. And the next question they ask you is why? Why should I go away? So I've been very honest with them, telling them, see, the previous patient was COVID. So they don't land, many of them don't land up the next day as well. Right? So this is the problem. So what we have done is we procured this ultraviolet sterilizer. I'm going to put about 6 tubes on the ceiling. Now, there are a lot of issues in this. Now, there will be shadow areas. Now, how we are going to, tackle that? And as you rightly mentioned, it has not been proved. Now, how do we prove that COVID-19 virus is going to be killed by ultraviolet rays? Okay, the other coronaviruses, they say they don't survive on ultraviolet. That's the best thing that we can do. So I'm going for this. And for this fumigation, the spraying, what happens is the device gets
Yeah, it's not good for electronics.
so what happens is it goes from it settles on the boards, the electronic boards inside the devices, and forms a gel over them. So the device companies, they advise us not to fumigate frequently. But definitely, I see out of this 7-8 patients I told you, 3 would be COVID positive, who stagger and come and spread. So my best bet is ultraviolet. No, there's nothing else available.
Very true.
Thank you, doctors. So we have another question from Santosh. Santosh, can you please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question?
Hello.
Santosh? Yeah. Yes.
Good evening to all. This is Santosh here. So I have one question. So I could see WhatsApp messages getting forwarded, and I have heard from 2 or 3 of my friends as well. And I too read an article regarding it that ICMR transferred the strain to Bharat Biotech by May 9, and then the press release about the vaccine was on July 29. So within some 50 days itself, they would have done with the thing. Developed the inactivated vaccine, conducted preclinical animal trial, and should have sent its report to the DCGA, right? So, what's your call on this, sir? Is it will the vaccine being getting developed will be effective, or what's your opinion on this? I just want to know about that.
So I think since then the ICMR spokesperson has come and said that there is no way we can release it for time schedule. I think they have given a clarification saying that that time schedule is not something that we actually believe in, and it's going to take a minimum of 3 to 6 months before it is possible. And I'm not vaccine specialist, but I don't think, like, even Russia has said they will release a vaccine after a 1-month trial. I don't think normally the vaccine trials take anywhere between 3 to 6 months before they can have an unproven vaccine, like many other unproven things released. But when you are dealing with a lot of life-threatening scenario, do the rules change? I don't know. That is a decision which I think as a scientific community we haven't faced. Even when it came to release of papers saying on cures or treatment, etc., I think a lot of scientific stuff were fast-tracked into journals. What would have never made it to scientific journals as treatment were fast-tracked from BCG to, so many things that we have gone through as things. So I think there are pros and cons to it. The honest answer is 1 month would be too short. Though I'm not the expert.
Even, I got to read that, Mr. Krishna Ella, he was also mentioned in a press thing that like it will take something around 3 months to do the clinical trials with animals itself. After that only we will be switching to the human trials like that he have mentioned. So that article it was also mentioned. So only I just asked like
Yeah.
this thing.
Then I'm not an expert, but I would agree that any vaccine that comes out within a 1 month of a trial is not the usual norm. Okay, but do unusual circumstances require fast tracking? If so, what are the hazards of that fast tracking? What would be the implications of that to people who actually use it in terms of safety? These are unanswered questions, but then these are not normal times. So I don't think we have those answers. But I would say anything that's fast track too fast would be an issue with me.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, doctor. So I'll ask one other question. So even Dr. Sandeep has mentioned that they are doing some of the consultations like through telemedicine. So how do you think the telemedicine is now helping out in the medical space during this COVID, during this pandemic? So
Since I answered it partly, I'll give Dr. Roy the first go at this.
So I was very much against telemedicine. Muthu knows that. And till I was admitted in the ward, and my colleagues, my medicine colleagues would do rounds. And I preferred the consult everyday morning rounds by, by video. The reason is when they come face to face with you making rounds, they are all in PPE. You don't see their face. Looking at a consultant's face is such an important thing. So, me as a patient, I found that them not coming directly in front of me, but doing a FaceTime with me was very much better because I could relate to them better. I knew whom I was talking to and things like that. But I'm sure even my GP friends now, they do consultation by FaceTime, and they collect their charges by Google Pay, and that seems to work very well because some patients depend on these consultants, like the people who are diabetics and things like that. They have to make general, come to the doctor and get a prescription done. So mostly it is more than clinical examination, but mainly their lab readings. Of course, if they have complications, that is an issue. But generally, a regular follow-up, it can be made through telemedicine, and it's a great thing for a telemedicine platform, even for GPs now.
I think very true. Like I said, there was a reluctance on patients to come to the hospital for care. Okay, and at the same time they had issues. I had stomach pain. I have this. I have that. So the things that could be handled without a necessary examination is something, or a follow-up when my sugars are so much, do I have to change the medication? I think these are out of my BP. Do I continue the medication? These kind of review questions are the ones that can be handled very easily on telemedicine. So I think definitely the use of telemedicine, at least in my hospital, we invested in the software and asked doctors to start doing telemedicine, which we never used to do before. So that is definitely a change. Having used it for nearly a month, I think there are still a lot of challenges which we are not able to address when we start using it practically to individual patients. But I think with time, those will evolve as well.
Thank you, doctors, for your response. So before we wrap up, we have prepared a quick quiz. So Harshini will be proceeding with the quiz and then the poll results. Over to you, Harshini.
Yes, thank you, Archana. Moving on to the quiz questions. Kindly enter your options in the chat box. So the first question: the artificial pancreas smartphone app was developed for the benefit of option A, liver disease, option B, heart patients, option C, diabetes, and option D, cancer. Yeah, we've not got the right answer. So yeah, it was answered by C3 MedTech. So the answer is option C, diabetes. Moving on to the next question. US technology giant Google is to invest dash for India digitization fund over next 5 to 7 years. Option A, $70 billion. Option B, $50 billion. Option C, $20 billion. And option D, 10. Yeah. No, we've not got the right answer, I guess. So yeah, it was given by Mr. Satish. The answer is option D, $10 billion. Moving on to the next question. Use Facebook to boost AI capabilities is option A, Balsamic, option B, Buffer, option C, Grokstyle, and option D, Avocent. No, we've not got the answer still. No, we've not got it yet. So yeah.
So
So yeah, let me give the answer. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just give the answer.
So the answer is option C, Grokstyle. Moving on to the next question. Dash is the largest creditor nation in the world. Option A, Japan. Option B, China. Option C, Germany. Or option D, USA. No. We've not got the right answer still. So yeah, the answer was given by Dr. Sandeep. So it's option A, Japan. Moving on to the last question. In terms of GDP, the Indian government spends dash percentage on healthcare in FY20 budget estimate. So yeah, the answer was given by Mr. Satish Rangarajan. It's option D, 1.6% is on healthcare. Thank you all. Thank you for your answers.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our digital cafe. And I want to say thank you very much to both my friends, Dr. Roy and Dr. Sandeep. Thank you very much for spending the evening with us. Hope you enjoyed interacting.
Can I say just a couple of things since there are innovators here? Okay.
Yes,
can I ask them to think about innovations of how we reach patients who are elderly, who are not familiar with the smartphone, who are not familiar with digital payments? How do we reach them through telemedicine or the services? Okay. Because otherwise, if they can get to a computer or if they use a smartphone and they are familiar with online payments, then they are fine. I find a large number of people reluctant to do that. That's one. Second, as like ultraviolet rays, any kind of safety, decontamination things that they think they can think of and innovate on. The third is I forgot what the third one is, but I was supposed to say one more. Okay, so yeah. So and a point of okay. So I think from my experience with the infrared thermometer, it is pretty hopeless, and therefore they need to come at something that's so commonly used, like an infra. How do we improve this and standardize this in a better way so that our point of care devices actually give readings that doctors can trust? Since there are innovators around, I think they should give serious thought to this, because these are my takeaways from the corona epidemic.
Okay. Dr. Roy, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having both of you here. We look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.